Good morning, folks. If you're just joining us, we're going to give others a couple more minutes to join us as well. And then I think we will start at 8:01 in the morning. Again, folks, good morning. If you're just joining us, we're going to give others maybe just two more minutes to also join us. And think we are going to start at 8:01 in the morning. Good morning, folks. I think we're ready to start. So okay, let's start. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop on water, which is, of course, one of the biggest issues that our state faces long term. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times. Of course, the Arizona Capital Times covers state government and politics. A lot of people describe us as an independent, non-ideological, nonpartisan newspaper. I kind of refer to ourselves as an equal harassment newspaper. And if you don't have a subscription, please let me know and I'll get you squared away. I want to thank our sponsors this morning for making this forum happen. Without their support, we could not hold public policy discussions on very big subjects such as the one that we are doing this morning. I want to thank the CAP. The 336-mile-long Central Arizona project is a monument to long-term thinking in Arizona. In the early 20th century, Arizona's leaders knew the state's future depended on a water supply that was secure, stable, and renewable. They pursued that vision, and today the canal delivers Colorado River water to central and southern Arizona, and it is the state's single largest source of water supply, serving 80% of Arizona's population. And here to welcome us is Lisa Atkins, board president of the Central Arizona Project. Lisa?
Good morning, Luigi. Thank you so much for inviting us back to talk about water again this season. It's a pleasure for me to say hello to everybody this morning on behalf of my 14 colleagues. And my gosh, it's an election year, so I didn't want to pass up passing along a little bit of information to you. A third of our board is elected every 2 years in the general election in one of the 3 counties. This year, the seats in Pinal and Pima County were up for election, and I'm very pleased to welcome the return of directors Karen Caesar, Pat Jacobs, and Mark Taylor to the board, and also welcome a new board member, Marie Perthreet from Pima County. Additionally, we'll have a new member from Pinal County, Steve Miller. And when you have the opportunity, I have a favor to ask, and that is when you see Sharon Magdal and Jim Hartigan, neither of whom ran for re-election, would you please thank them for all the time and work they did on behalf of the CAP for their counties and for the state. They've been great colleagues and strong advocates on behalf of CAP. So here we are just a few months ago, we were talking about water and we're back. No doubt you'll hear about the work of the Arizona Reconsultation Committee, its work to date and next steps, and you'll hear more about augmentation, conservation, and infrastructure. We love to talk about CAP's amazing infrastructure, so I'm looking forward to hearing that discussion. Before turning it back to Luigi, though, I'd like to give a shout out to all those working in the water industry who have kept the water flowing during the pandemic. While it's been a challenging time, access to water has never been an issue, thanks to many of you watching today. So please enjoy today's program. I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot, and thanks, Capital Times.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. Also, as our sponsor this morning is SRP. SRP, of course, provides reliable, affordable water and power to more than 2 million people in a 2,900 square mile service area that spans three Arizona counties, including most of the Phoenix metro area. Its water business is one of the largest raw water suppliers in the state, delivering about 800,000 acre feet of water annually to a 375 square mile service area and manage a 13,000 square mile watershed that includes an extensive system of reservoirs, wells, canals, and irrigation laterals. And here to also welcome us this morning is Molly Green, Senior Director of Arizona Government Relations and Public Policy for SRP. Molly?
Good morning. On behalf of SRP's nearly 6,000 employees, thank you all for participating in today's event, and thanks to Luigi and the Capital Times for continuing the dialogue on water policy. Never have the water buffaloes been the cool kids at the Capitol, so it's very exciting time to enjoy such popularity. I really do applaud the effort to educate each other and the policy wonks on the critical water policies. In the nearly 120 years since SRP's inception, we have developed and delivered water and power for economic prosperity. We've been a resilient partner with farmers, cities, tribes, and businesses, and we remain vigilant in working with our customers in the community. I just want to make a point real quick on the power side to remind our customers that we are here to help and to encourage those who are facing financial difficulties to call SRP or to go to our website. There are funds available to help pay your power bill, and if folks are not reaching out, then they won't be able to avail themselves of that opportunity before they lapse at the end of the year. On the water side of the business, resilience was a core principle behind the Roosevelt Dam project that manages the powerful forces of flood and drought to provide reliable water to a growing community. So you'll hear more about that later, specifically what we're doing to promote the resilience of the Valley's water supplies for the next 100 years. So thanks again and enjoy the program.
Thank you, Molly, I appreciate it. And finally, also our sponsor is EPCOR. EPCOR started 125 years ago in Edmonton, Canada, as the first municipality-owned electric utility, and 10 years later as Edmonton's water utility. Today, EPCOR is one of the largest private utilities in the Southwest. EPCOR provides, of course, clean water, wastewater, and drainage services, and also energy to more than 2 million customers in the US and in Canada. EPCOR, thank you again for sponsoring this morning's scoop. We have a great panel this morning. Joining us is Tom Bushashki, who is the director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Tom, of course, has more than 30 years of experience in water management. He's responsible for management of the state's water supplies, including multiple planning and policy, regulatory and permitting programs dedicated to that mission. He also serves as Arizona's principal negotiator on matters relating to the Colorado River. Tom, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Luigi. Good morning, and hopefully people can see my little water buffalo button handed out at the town hall at the Grand Canyon in 2004. Since Molly opened the door, I figured I'd show everyone the button. Welcome.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks for showing us the button. And yes, we can see it. Thank you again. Ted Cook is also joining us this morning. Ted Cook is the general manager of the Central Arizona Project. Previously, he served as a deputy general manager, finance and administration, responsible for finance, accounting, risk management, supply chain and facilities management, information technology, environmental compliance, health and safety, and protective services. He joined CAP in 1999. Ted, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Also joining us is Troy Day. Troy Day is the Vice President of Engineering and Commercial Services for EPCOR USA. Mr. Day has more than 25 years of experience in the water business. And in his current role, he has responsibility for the company's 10-year, $770 million infrastructure investment program. He also has oversight of the company's distribution pipeline, water operations in Texas. Mr. Day's career began in the public sector, first as a hydrologist with the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and then with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, where he managed, of course, numerous programs, including those guiding and administering the state of Arizona's water permitting and water quality standards. He has served on as a board member of the Water Utilities Association of Arizona for the past 11 years and was also past president from 2010 to 2017. Mr. Day, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Luigi. Happy to be here.
And finally, we have Bruce Hallen, who is the Director of Water Supply for SRP. Bruce has over 30 years of experience in the water resource and power utility industries. The bulk of those years, by the way, with SRP. He has worked in the fields of water resource development and management, water resource planning, water rights, energy, corporate planning and strategy, land rights management and acquisitions, contract development and negotiations, and forest health. He previously served as Director of Water Rights and Contracts at SRP, and prior to joining SRP, he was a partner in a water resource consulting business and worked for the Arizona Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation. He has a bachelor's in urban studies geography from Arizona State University, and he is also a licensed realtor. Mr. Hallen, thank you again for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Luigi. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
All right, so we have a lot to discuss, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Tom and Ted to give us an update regarding the Bureau of Reclamation's latest projections, showing that if drought continued between now and 2025, which seems like that's likely, but Tom and Ted can correct me, chances water levels in Lake Mead falling below the critical level stand at 20%, whereas last time the projection was 12%. I guess the question for you, sirs, is that what does this mean for Arizona and the basin states?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll go first. I'd like to share my screen and just flip through a couple of slides real quickly to kind of help answer that question. Most of the attention over the last week or so has been from the update of the 5-year probability projections that the Bureau prepares about 3 times a year. They just did that in August. I'm going to try and share my screen. Here we go. So real quickly, what's shown here is the status of the Colorado River Basin storage, the 2 major reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, as of late last week. The total system is about 49% full, and last year is a little bit less than last year at this same time. This is a graph that shows the snowpack and inflow into Lake Powell. The red line is last year. The kind of fuzzy light blue line is this year, and the darker blue line is the average. So we did have an average snowpack, but because the conditions are so dry, we only had about 55% of average inflow into Lake Powell this year. That is what caused the change, I guess, in the recent 5-year probability projections. I won't go through this graph in detail, but basically on the right there, the blue line is the average runoff into Lake Powell by month. And you can see the bars are what actually happened this year, and particularly in the main runoff months of May, June, and July. It was very, very disappointing. And again, because the ground was soaking up and the snow was sublimating because it was so warm and so dry. This is probably what you're referring to, Luigi, that got a lot of attention here. The last time the 5-year probability table was done was in April. That's on the left, and on the right is the August the August 5-year projection. I've circled there on the right, and these are both the so-called stress test hydrology, which is a more conservative hydrology. And from top to bottom are the various tiers in Lake Mead. The top row is surplus. The second row is normal. The third row, which is where we're at right now, is tier 0, and then tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So where I've circled there is where on the right is where the major changes have occurred. That the probability of a tier 1 in 2022 has gone up by almost a factor of 3 from 12% to 32%. And then we see in 2025 a large increase in the probability of a tier 3 shortage. And that gets our attention. In general, what these graphs show is that more of the blue color, which is the darker it is, the more likely it is, has kind of slid down into the lower half of the chart, meaning that it's going to be more likely that we're going to have lower tiers of shortage. And that again is based on these current very warm and very dry. This is the last slide I'll show on this question. We are right here, right now. We're in tier 0. We will be in tier 0 in 2021, but then things start to diverge a little bit. There is a very good chance, if I go back to the last graph, in 2022, 60% chance that we will remain in tier 0, but a significant chance that we might dip down into tier 1. And that's represented by this line here, the so-called min projection, that if Lake Powell releases are reduced based on the lower levels in Lake Powell, then Lake Mead has a more probability that it will decline into tier 1 in 2022. So this is just a message for us to remain diligent. We've been doing more than our mandatory DCP contributions for the last several years, and I expect that to continue. And hopefully other states will continue to do that as well. And Mexico also is doing the same thing, and that may make the difference between tier 0 or tier 1 in 2022.
And thank you for sharing those screens, Ted.
Luigi?
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
This is Tom. I'd like to just jump in and say that there is 40 feet or so of conserved water in Lake Mead since 2014. So the drought contingency plan is effective by incentivizing that water staying in the lake. And like Ted said, additional conservation being done. And without that 40 feet of water conserved in the lake, the numbers Ted described would be a lot worse. So I just want everyone to know that the DCP is working the way we had hoped and intended it to do so.
We would be in tier 2 without that 40 feet of water today.
Correct.
So I want to go back to you, Tom, in a minute, but I want to pull in Troy. Troy, your company is a municipal water servicing company. Of course, you have customers that rely on you for water. When you hear projections like this one, what comes to your mind?
Well, they're troubling projections, but I think Arizona has positioned itself well in how we've handled the drought contingency plan and what to do during the different tiers. So for municipal users like EPCOR, the cities, other municipal providers, I think there's a plan ahead of us to deal with any shortages, and the municipal providers that provide drinking water to so many people in Arizona are really way down the list on people who are going to get shorted for water.
And I guess, Bruce, same question for you, sir.
Yeah, from our perspective, we'll continue supporting the state when it comes to the DCP and the shortage criteria and the work that they're doing. Conservation is extremely important. From SRP's perspective, just to provide you a better understanding of the unique characteristics associated with our watershed versus the Colorado River watershed. We essentially filled our system last year. 2 of the last 3 years, we've seen fairly wet winters. And so we've been fortunate to have that infrastructure in place to capture that water. So looking to this next year, we have carryover capacity where we'll be in the 75% to 80% range. And a lot of that just has to do, even though we're 1,000 miles further south from Colorado watershed, much larger, but it's kind of interesting, the unique characteristics that you see between these 2 watersheds and how they respond when it comes to precipitation. Our watershed, essentially, it is drier and it is warmer. So when Ted talks about warmer temperatures, evapotranspiration, evaporation, our runoff occurs early in the year, where you don't see that evaporation and evapotranspiration having as large of impact on the runoff into the system. And so, it's very important that these 2 systems have a reliable and sustainable supply of water. but I just wanted to point out there are some unique characteristics between these two watersheds, and the condition of the SRP watershed, at least the last few years, has been fairly good. As Ted mentioned, we've had this past year and during this past monsoon season, this was the driest monsoon on record. It was also dry in Colorado. So as Ted talked about runoff and the need to, prime that watershed and get that soil wet, it looks like going into this winter season, we're about the same situation or maybe even a worse situation than we were last year.
So, Tom, I want to ask you, so, DCP has been in place now for what, 2 years, something like that. And you mentioned 40 feet of water has been preserved in the lake as a result of DCP. Now, assuming we do go down to very critical levels, as Ted had outlined, what are, just very briefly, what happens? What are the options for the state? Are we looking at, strengthening DCP, doing more?
So the doing more, Luigi, might be more appropriate for the reconsultation discussion. But if we get into a situation where municipal water providers or some tribes' water rights are actually impacted by the lower levels in Lake Mead, there are options, including the Arizona Water Banking Authority has some obligations to tribes and cities to provide some of the drought relief water that they've been storing underground since about 1995. And of course, the cities all have drought plans that would allow them to deal with declining water supplies in stages in terms of their own business model within each city and for their residential and industrial customers within each city. So we're well prepared to take care of this if it gets to that point.
Let me ask you about, go ahead.
I might mention really quickly too, just to remind folks that in DCP, as Lake Mead declines, the amount of water that's mandatory to reduce goes up significantly. We're at, in Arizona, 192,000 acre feet mandatory reduction under Tier 0. We're doing over 300,000 acre feet. But if we go into a Tier 1, then it becomes 512,000 acre feet. And even higher in Tier 2 and Tier 3. So there's kind of a built-in acceleration of the amount of conservation that has to be done already into DCP. This isn't as good as it gets as far as what we're required to do. It will increase. It will be more painful, but it's got that feature baked in.
Troy, I just want to ask you, I know you mentioned contingencies, not just for EPCO, right, but for other utilities, water utilities. If we are going to hit these certain levels, and hopefully we're able to avoid that from happening, can you just assure us that in terms of water supply, that's absolutely not going to be disrupted? And, we do have reliable water supply for at least drinking water supply for customers.
Absolutely. And as I said, I think Arizona has planned well. We've been storing water for 20 years, for 2 decades with the Arizona Water Bank, as Tom mentioned. There will need to be some infrastructure put in place to withdraw the water and get it to where it's needed. But we've got a fair amount of water stored underground that should shortages start to affect the municipal providers, there's 2 decades worth of water stored there.
Let me shift to the reconsultation process. Tom or Ted, can you update us where we're at? I know that the modeling group has been meeting. What exactly are they meeting about, just real briefly, and then what's next?
The modeling group is one of 2 advisory groups that Tom and I, as co-chairs of the Arizona Reconsultation Committee, has set up. And as you noted, Luigi, the modeling and analysis work group has already met once. They will meet here probably in about another month or so, and then continue to meet going into early 2021. This is a decision support group for the Arizona Reconsultation Committee, and they will first of all identify and then analyze and model a number of scenarios to provide some context for the discussions that haven't even started yet among the basin states. Different hydrologic scenarios, different demand scenarios, that we can look at in advance and see if we do this, here's what the result will be on the Colorado River Basin. The group will also be available to answer questions as proposals are brought up that maybe weren't already evaluated. What will happen if this is done or if that is done, or how much of a certain response is needed to affect a particular outcome. So a lot of the heavy lifting on the analytical side will be done by that team. It's being chaired by a couple of very capable folks from Tom's shop and my shop, Benita Carta from ADWR and Chuck Cullen from CWCD, and has a number of extremely proficient modeling types. We call them the IST, geologists, hydrologists, and so forth, on that team that have been provided to us by the steering committee delegates.
And Tom, so what happens after these modeling groups completed its work?
Well, Luigi, the modeling group, I guess, is not going to complete its work until we have
okay.
a proposal or an alternative that the state or the basin states collectively might put into the NEPA process with the federal government for the post-2026 operation of the river. So they'll be supporting the ARC throughout the process a number of years. The other key group here is the strategy team that will be uniquely situated to have members that have expertise in legal or policy on the Colorado River to also help inform the reconsultation committee, Ted and I, and the negotiating team for the state of Arizona as we work towards, again, post-2026 operations.
And Bruce, you know, it's very comforting to hear that your water system is filled and it's not experiencing the same kind of or not, that you don't have the same kind of situation that we're facing with the Colorado River. But in this reconsultation process, can you briefly describe for us what SRP's interests are? What do you want to see here?
Well, we're all part of this regional effort to ensure that there's a long-term reliable supply of water. And so SRP is actively involved together with Department of Water Resources and the CAP to work together with them to find solutions on how we can improve the resiliency and the reliability of that water supply. We're evaluating, in partnership with the Central Arizona Project, an interconnect facility where we can connect the SRP system to the CAP system. And we believe that that'll provide us some additional opportunities to move water around within the region to help solve some problems. There are stored water long-term storage credits where there's difficulty moving some of that water to areas where it's needed. There's also some new conservation storage space behind Roosevelt where we think that this interconnect facility may assist. And then we're also evaluating the opportunity potentially to develop maybe some additional water supplies on the Verde River as part of this sediment issue that we're dealing with at Horseshoe Reservoir, where this interconnect facility will enable potentially some of that water to be delivered to other areas that need a long-term reliable supply that are currently relying upon groundwater. And so we're actively involved in partnering together with the state and the CAP on trying to come up with solutions to improve the water situation, not only within the Phoenix metropolitan area, but also within the region.
Before I shift to some of the long-term projects that we may be looking at to ensure that we have a reliable water supply, I want to ask Tom just real quick about the Lake Powell pipeline. Recently 6 basin states opposed this proposal, or opposed getting this proposal I guess, addressed outside of the 7 basin state process that's been established by the basin states. Tom, just give us a brief background of what is the proposed Lake Powell pipeline project. Why do the 6 basin states oppose it? And I guess, as I mentioned before, why is it important for the basin states, of course, including Utah, to discuss this project within the 7-state process?
So Luigi, the Lake Powell pipeline project, Utah has been working on this for at least 13 or so years. It's intended to move ultimately 86,000 acre feet of water from Lake Powell to the St. George area in Utah. That means the water would move from the upper basin to the lower basin. That's one of the issues that is in play here. And under what circumstances might that happen? And so the 6 states don't really oppose the Lake Powell pipeline project. I think we have concerns over operational and legal issues, like the one I just mentioned with water moving from the upper to lower basin. And really what we asked the secretary to do was to slow down the NEPA process to allow the states, the 7 states, to come to some common ground on those operational and legal issues, much as we've done in the past in dealing with disagreements or operational and legal issues. The drought contingency plan is a prime example. And there's language in the drought contingency plan and in many of our agreements between the basin states that really is legal savings language that allows the state's underlying legal position to not be precedentially set by the agreement that you're entering into, and reserving your right, if you ever need to, in litigation to assert your legal position. We do not want litigation. Litigation is not a path to success. There's a lot of uncertainty with the outcomes of litigation, and it takes a lot of time. And we don't have the time, and we don't need the uncertainty, especially as we move into this period of trying to reconsult with the 7 basin states and the federal government on the post-2026 operations of the river.
Thank you, Tom. So I want to remind our audience and our viewers and our listeners, if you want to send in questions, please do so. We encourage you to ask questions. We're going to try and tackle as many as we can near the end of our program. But let me shift to some of the potential long-term projects that we might be looking at. One of them is, and correct me, Ted, here if I'm wrong, but Arizona signed a letter of intent with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California to explore the possibility of, Southern California using their reclaimed water that is otherwise discharged to the ocean. And the idea here, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, if they're using water that otherwise would be discharged to the ocean, then ultimately their demand for water from the Colorado River is lessened. Tell us a little bit more about this project, and or at least this exploration of this idea, and eventually what is, for Arizona, what is the interest there?
Well, this is just another example. It's referred to as the Regional Reclaimed Water Conservation Program, being developed by Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. This is just another example of the opportunities that we in Arizona are always looking for, whether it be binational desalination or other augmentation of water supplies, things like that. The interconnection that Bruce referred to between SRP and CAP. This is just another one of those things. And in a nutshell, what it is, as you said, is that Metropolitan will look at reclaiming and reusing the water that they are currently discharging into the Pacific Ocean. And there's many layers to this. It's Metropolitan, it's also LADWP, it is the LA County Wastewater Pollution Control District, and some of the other cities, individual cities in the greater LA area that are working together on this. But as you pointed out, the main opportunity for Arizona will be if this other water supply comes into being, and they're looking at around 400,000 acre feet, which is a large number. If it comes into being in Southern California, they might not rely so heavily on their Colorado River supply. And so there's an opportunity possibly for exchange, where basically if Arizona parties contribute to the success, financially, to the success of this reclaimed water program, then maybe the benefit of that could be to exchange a portion of California's Colorado River supply for use in Arizona. And that will have very similar results. It's like diversifying your portfolio, that all of these things are not aligned with each other, like the SRP watershed and the Colorado River watershed don't always do the same thing. And so the more interconnection that you have and the more sources that you have in your portfolio, the overall the less risk and the more sustainable, reliable supply that you have. That's it in a nutshell.
From what I'm hearing,
have signed a letter of intent so that we can be involved in those conversations with Metropolitan and others.
It seems to me that the idea, and correct me, Ted, if I'm wrong, we're not the only state looking at this potential arrangement, right?
No, we're not.
So the last time we were in the morning scoop, you had talked about desalination. I wanted to spend just a little bit of time on desalination before we go into infrastructure projects. And I want to ask Troy and Bruce, their most immediate infrastructure needs, but also long-term, what we're looking at in terms of infrastructure. But just real quick, if you had asked folks about desalination, it seems like a pretty big, but kind of a gargantuan idea that will take, some time, some money. It doesn't seem like it was feasible if you ask people maybe like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but now we're in a drought situation. So tell me exactly what CAP is doing in this arena.
Well, CAP is in more of a support role with some of the contracting and some of the technical analysis. Director Wyszotsky is the Arizona representative. And I think, Tom, you're the chair of the U.S. group, if I'm not mistaken, in the binational effort. So he's really is our expert on this desalination project.
Tom, can you briefly tell us what's happening here and what are we looking at in the next couple of years?
So Luigi, pursuant to Minute 323 of the 1944 Water Treaty between the U.S. and Mexico, that minute was signed in the fall of 2017. A binational desalination work group was set up to look at potential opportunities for desalination in the Sea of Cortez. I am the co-chair on the U.S. side. My counterpart for the state of Sonora in Mexico is the co-chair for Mexico. There was a report published on the International Boundary and Water Commission website in June of this year. It talks about potential places where we might do desal for about 200,000 acre feet in total. Without getting into all the details, the price of that water would be somewhere between $2,200 and $2,500 per acre foot. That water would probably be shipped up to the Yuma area so that we could exchange water with Mexico's Colorado River water. That's an issue that still needs to be worked out, how that would work, whether the legalities of that happening. So in terms of next steps, those are some of the things being worked on. The consultants that we hired, along with SRP, CAP, and Freeport Minerals and DWR, needs to refine some of the estimates and analyses that it's doing. This is a long time horizon for a project with Mexico, probably at least 10 years away or more. So there are many next steps to be accomplished. And if Mexico does decide that this is something they would like to do, another minute to the treaty needs to be negotiated, as well as the existing minute that set up the framework for this. So it is potentially out there in the future. The price really isn't outrageous. If you think about, there are users in the city of Phoenix, for example, that are probably paying between $1,200 and $1,500 an acre foot if they're high water users. So we're not getting out of the realm of possibility that this is an affordable water supply out into the future, at least on the municipal side for Arizona people.
And Troy, let me ask you, well, first of all, when you hear that there's a potential desal project and the cost of that is not out of the realm of possibility, as Tom mentioned, what comes to your mind when potentially in the next decade or so we might have this resource?
Well, regarding desalination, I think it will play a role in our future water supply, and water is going to get more expensive. The $1,200–1,300 acre foot per acre foot that Tom mentioned, it really is not expensive in the big scheme of things. You're seeing Colorado River water go for about $10,000 an acre foot on the free market. Our project in Texas is selling water for $1,700 an acre foot. Really, those aren't big numbers as far as where the price of water is going.
And so, Bruce, let me shift to infrastructure. So, I know SRPs. You mentioned sedimentation. And explain to us, when you say sedimentation, kind of my kindergarten, first grade science class comes to my mind, but I think that's completely wrong. It's not the same thing as what you're talking about here, but what is sedimentation? What is the project that you're looking at? And give us an overview of it. Yes.
Sure, no problem. We've talked about resiliency. We've talked about certainty associated with your water supply. And what we're facing on the Verde side of the system, on the Verde River, in particular, Horseshoe Reservoir, which is the uppermost reservoir that captures all the water coming off the Verde watershed. What we're facing there is essentially we're losing capacity at that reservoir due to sedimentation. We're seeing a buildup of sedimentation to the point where we've lost a little over a third of the capacity at Horseshoe Reservoir. So the last thing you want in an arid environment is losing your ability to store water and to store as much water as possible. Because as we all know, the water supply and the water runoff is very variable. So you want to capture that water when you do get the runoff so that you can carry yourself through that next dry period. So that's the concern at Horseshoe Reservoir, is this sedimentation, this loss of capacity, and the impact that it may have on the resiliency of the water supply. And so we've initiated a study, and actually the first meeting kicked off on September 14th, and it's an appraisal level study that's being led by the Bureau of Reclamation, where we're identifying alternatives on how we mitigate this problem. And so, we want to protect the storage rights that we have behind Horseshoe. SRP has storage rights, as does the city of Phoenix. But when you look at the Verde system, we've also spilled about 44% of the time on the Verde side of the system. And so as we look at alternatives on how to deal with this sediment problem and how to retain that resiliency, there may be opportunities for us, a couple of the options that we looked at. Do you remove the sediment? That's extremely expensive, and there's a lot of environmental challenges associated with that. And so there may be opportunities in which maybe you construct some additional storage. So is that new storage, or is that essentially enhancing existing storage infrastructure? So if you do enhance that storage infrastructure and you do replace that water at Horseshoe, is there an opportunity potentially then to store some additional water for use for others within the Phoenix metropolitan region that are dependent upon groundwater? And so all that is going to be discussed as part of this ongoing appraisal study that's being led by the Bureau of Reclamation. We're hoping that that appraisal analysis will complete sometime in April of 2021. There's a wide variety of stakeholders, probably many of the people that are on this phone right now that are participating in this program. But we're hoping by April of next year that we'll have a better understanding on preferred alternatives and potentially go to that next level where we talk about a feasibility study and moving forward in more detail on what the solution might be to deal with this sedimentation problem.
Thank you, Bruce. Troy, I want to go to you. I want to ask you about some of the infrastructure projects that EPCOR is currently undertaking. One of the things that I think really stood out for me was you entered into a partnership with, I think, the city of Anthem to build a water storage facility underneath the park, which to me is a very neat idea. The idea is that, if you're watering the plants, then, the water goes back to the storage facility. Tell us a little bit about this project. How expensive is it? And is it really feasible for, future parks?
Absolutely. It is a unique project. We've enlisted several different ways of recharging the aquifer. We utilize nearly 100% of our treated effluent. We treat it to A+ standards. We've used spreading basins, which is the normal way. More geographically efficient ways are vadose-zone wells, where they're kind of dry wells and they percolate down into the aquifer storage and recovery wells. And this Anthem project is really fairly unique. So the Anthem recharge project, it's 15 trenches that are 20 feet deep. They're approximately 80 feet long. They're backfilled with cobble, and then there's 4 foot of soil on top of the cobble layer. The recharge actually comes in from the piping about underneath the soil layer, about 4 feet. And then the project didn't start with a park on it. The project started out in the desert, and then we partnered with Anthem, the Anthem Community Council, and we built a soccer field on top of this recharge trench. So any incidental recharge and the park uses reclaimed water that we provide as well. So any incidental or overwatering should go into that recharge project as well.
Let's talk about conservation efforts.
Luigi?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
So I just want to add something about infrastructure projects, and what we're talking about there maybe are new construction, so to speak, but
Yep.
we're also leveraging existing infrastructure. CAP has a framework in place to be able to wheel non-project water. This might be how we get the desal water out of Mexico if we get that far.
When you say non-project water, what is that exactly?
So that would be if we do a desal project with Mexico and we exchange the desal water for some of Mexico's Colorado River water, that's non-project water that could go through the canal. There's a framework agreement in place, and CAP's been working on that for quite a while. Another example is the flood control space at Roosevelt Dam. You can use that for temporary storage, perhaps in the summertime when the flood risk is basically minimal. And SRP's been looking at that for well over 10 years. So those leveraging of existing infrastructure is part of this infrastructure puzzle as well, and for probably cheaper than building new infrastructure.
Go ahead.
I'd like to add to that, the aging infrastructure problem is a problem, and Ted and Tom and Bruce are all, they're more the wholesale infrastructure, we're more the retail infrastructure, but all of it is important and all of it works together. The American Society of Civil Engineers, they do a report card on infrastructure, America's infrastructure every year, and perennially the water and wastewater utilities get a D, D minus, D plus, depending on where you are. That's due primarily to a very large funding gap in what is actually needed for repair and replacement of existing infrastructure, as Tom was saying. The funding gap is estimated, again, the American Society of Civil Engineers estimated it's $130 million need annually across the country. The actual funding is about $47 billion. So there's about an $80 billion annual gap in spending for infrastructure projects. And for Arizona alone, EPA estimates that just for drinking water, just for Arizona, there's going to be a $9 billion infrastructure repair and replacement need over the next 20 years. So let me tie this back into what we're talking about. We talk a lot about conservation. We talk about next bucket of water. So the Arizona municipalities and water utilities serve over 5.2 million people in Arizona. That uses 1.3 to 1.4 million acre feet a year. Now, most of the utilities in Arizona have a goal. It's a lost water goal of 10%. Keep in mind, that's the goal. Typically, the lost water is above that. So
that's water, that's 10%. That's water that we lose because of leakage, because of precipitation, right?
Right. There, leakage, slow meters. It's a fairly complicated problem. I'm going to oversimplify it for this forum, but a large part of lost water is aging infrastructure, old pipes, old mains, and the need to fund that. So back to the 1.3 million acre feet a year that municipal providers use. The goal of 10% loss means that's 130,000 acre feet lost every year. Now, keep in mind, that's the goal. Not everybody is meeting that goal. So it's likely a higher number. And as the infrastructure ages, it's going to get worse. So the funding gap needs to be closed. City councils, corporation commission need to recognize the need for proper infrastructure funding, make sure we have a main and distribution replacement program in place. But really, that conservation is one way to enhance the water we have. But if we keep up our infrastructure, that's an actually very large bucket of water that we're losing every year.
And Bruce, I'm presuming it's the same situation for SRP. You have fairly aging infrastructure. Give us an idea, if you were to work on upgrading them and maybe replacing them, how much we're talking about here? And does this mean then that, what I'm hearing really is that when you, either at the municipal level or at the corporation commission level, really what I'm hearing is that, at some point the water users, residential water users like me will have to, at some point, will have to pay more because that's what's needed.
Luigi, we're not on the retail level. We don't have distribution lines. As Troy mentioned, we're more on the wholesale level, but I agree 100% with Troy that this issue associated with aging infrastructure is going to be an ongoing challenge. And infrastructure and the fact that we have infrastructure and interconnected infrastructure is the primary reason why we have such a resilient water supply within the Phoenix metropolitan region. So it's critical that we maintain that infrastructure. This sediment issue that we're dealing with is really an aging infrastructure issue. The fact of the matter is virtually all the reservoirs in Western US are going to have to deal with this situation eventually due to sedimentation and those reservoirs filling with sedimentation. Each year we spend millions of dollars upgrading our groundwater system, our groundwater wells. We use groundwater and that groundwater system, to supplement our surface water supplies and also as an opportunity to recover some of these long-term storage credits. So it's important that we have an operable system in order to meet our customers' needs. But when you talk about conservation, you mentioned conservation, I guess I'll just give a shout out to the cities and others that when you look at water use within our system over the last 20 years, we've reduced water use by about 30%. And you've seen ongoing growth, you've seen urbanization, but people are doing the right thing. The cities are doing the right thing. They've adopted this conservation culture where you're seeing people just using less water, which is a good thing when it comes to investing in infrastructure.
Just like to add just maybe
Yeah, go ahead,
a couple of comments here real quick. That all of these things that we've talked about this morning about augmenting our supply and desalination and so on and so forth, while there will be need for, say, new infrastructure, as you've gathered from this conversation this morning, is that maintaining and enhancing the infrastructure that we have is really at the top of that list, because where those new supplies or those replacement supplies are going to get to the end user in the infrastructure that we have today. The Central Arizona project, as Tom pointed out, this has been oversized on purpose to allow other supplies of water to be delivered through that canal. There's a significant maintenance budget every year to keep that existing infrastructure in top condition. It's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. There's always something that needs to be replaced from end to end, whether it's fiber optic cable or the microwave system or pumps or relays or computer equipment. There's always something going on to make sure that there's readiness to deliver all the time. And there's lots of redundancy that's already built into that system. And the interconnection of these systems, as Bruce pointed out, will give us even greater redundancy. If we can't get from point A to point B because something's not working right, there's another way to do it. So really our top priority is maintaining the infrastructure that we have. There will be enhancements as well, but maintaining and keeping what we have already in top condition is our priority.
I want to go to, thank you, Ted. I want to go to some of the audience questions. I've seen a lot of questions that has to do with the transfer of water from the Colorado River in La Paz County to the city of Queen Creek. Tom, one question here says, given the forecasts that we've discussed earlier this morning, how do you justify this transfer? Go ahead, Tom.
So those forecasts show potential reductions of Colorado River availability to Arizona, and those reductions are going to fall through the priority system. The higher the priority you have, the less chance you're going to get impacted. So it has nothing to do with the potential for the transfer. There are certain priorities on the Colorado River for the water used on the river. Those priorities will be honored. The water that's moving from the river to Queen Creek is priority 4 in the system, equal priority to the CAP, and a lower priority than some of the other water users on the river, some of the tribes and in the Yuma area. So that's really not something that should be part of the discussion in terms of whether or not water should move from the river into central Arizona, because the priority system takes care of the shortages that will attend to that water and to the water that already is moving through the CAP to central Arizona.
To those who might be, who might want to hear from you about the rationale for the transfer, can you just very briefly tackle this?
So again, there is a substantive policy that guides the decision-making process for me. The director makes a recommendation to the Secretary of the Interior. The Secretary of the Interior makes the final decision. The Queen Creek transfers in the place where my recommendation has been sent to the Secretary of the Interior. So we look at potential impacts to the water quality, to other water users on the river. And so again, the contractor who holds the right to that water on the river has some rights to move water as well. And so that was part of the calculus in terms of making that decision. So again, the priorities on the river are not all the same. And so there are some that believe my recommendation sets a precedent in which future transfers will just be rubber stamped. That's not the case. Each potential transfer will have to be looked at on its own merits or lack of merit thereof. We'll have to look at the type of the water right, what the contracts are, what limitations there are, what flexibilities they are within those contracts, and they vary greatly. And they're very different, for example, in the Yuma area than they are in the Cibola area, further north from Yuma, where this water was transferred from to Queen Creek.
In fact, Tom, there's just a quick follow-up question from James. Do you foresee increasing transfer of water from rural agricultural areas such as Yuma County for growth or continued growth in the more urban areas of the state, such as, of course, the metropolitan area?
I think we've seen in the past a desire to move water from the river, including the Yuma area. But again, there are some very unique water right priorities and contractual considerations for the water in the Yuma area. Again, this P priority 1, 2, and 3 water, so to speak, as compared to the priority 4 water that was moved to Queen Creek.
I think, Bruce, this question is for you from someone anonymous. The question is, can Horseshoe be dredged to remove the sedimentation? I think we kind of discussed it a little bit, but is this an option?
Yeah, we did look at that. And actually, Horseshoe is a fairly remote facility. And so it's a dirt road to get to Horseshoe. It's surrounded by National Forest Service lands. And so, just the optics of bringing equipment into Horseshoe would be a significant challenge. You could dredge Horseshoe, but then what do you do with the material? And I guess I should add that dredging is extremely expensive. We estimate over $1 billion to dredge Horseshoe to restore that capacity. And so from that perspective, and the environmental challenges, and you have to remember that each year we're losing about 1,000 acre feet to sedimentation. Just for those issues alone, we think that actual dredging would be a significant challenge in order to restore the capacity of Horseshoe. But again, that'll be part of this analysis that we're going through together that the Bureau of Reclamation is leading as part of this appraisal level analysis to get a better understanding on how we might mitigate and what it means to dredge and what it means to remove that sediment. So we'll get a better understanding through this appraisal process.
Thank you, Bruce. So here's a question from Tricia, and I think she's citing a poll. I haven't seen the poll, so I don't know exactly which poll she's referring to, but she's citing a poll that says that most voters don't believe Arizona has sufficient water to meet all of it needs for the next 50 years. And I guess I'll ask Ted and Troy about this then. Her question is, what do you think of this sentiment, and what do you think voters are missing?
Well, I'll tackle that one first. There are some pretty dismal forecasts that are out there about what if there's a back-to-back drought, or if we look at tree rings, droughts from 500 years ago, and that type of thing happens for an extended period of time, what might happen to our life. And those are valid things for folks to look at. What that doesn't take into account, though, is the programs that we have put in place and our ability to put additional programs in place to deal with that And those types of outcomes don't happen all at once. They take place over a long period of time. And we have the ability to adapt and to manage our water supply, as we've demonstrated since the Colorado River began to be diverted for modern uses. So they are, I think, an eye opener for a lot of folks. That keeps us vigilant and keeps us focused on what we need to focus on. But in large part, in my opinion at least, those dire predictions will only occur if there's a complete lack of response and a complete lack of action. And that's just not how we deal with these things in Arizona and in the desert Southwest.
Troy, the same question to you, sir. You're a retail provider, so when you see polls or you see news stories or you see this very dismal reports about the water situation in Arizona, what do you make of them?
Well, there are some very dismal projections, and I think Ted framed it up well. If we do nothing, it will become a problem. But we've been active as a state. We've been active as water providers. I was disappointed to hear from Molly that we're not the cool kids. I always thought we were the cool kids. But regarding water use, and conservation is going to play a role here. And as climate change continues to confound us in drought, I mean, we're in a very long, prolonged drought. This may be a new era of droughts. We simply don't know. I think we have to get smarter about water use, better conservation, maybe less grass in yards, perhaps less pools. There's a lot of flexibility in how we use water today in an arid climate that could be revised.
And I think with that, we are out of time. And I just want to thank everybody for spending this morning with us, and to our viewers and listeners as well. I just want to thank you all. Tom, thank you for the time. Ted, thank you for the time. Troy, the same to you. And Bruce, thank you again for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Luigi.
Thank you.
And again, to our sponsors, I just want to thank you, EPCOR, SRP, and CAP. Thank you for engaging in this way. As I mentioned earlier this morning, without your support, we cannot hold public policy discussions such as the one that we had this morning. To all our viewers and to our listeners, thank you for your time, and I guess I'll see you around.